Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone. Well, we are now less than 24 hours away from the start of Christmas Day, I guess depending on where you are on the international dateline, of course. And I would like to suggest to you that everyone who lives in the West, everyone who appreciates and values the democratic freedoms and the basic moral intuitions and principles which underpin those democratic freedoms that we all enjoy in the West and often take for granted, that if you care about those things, you value those things, then you should celebrate Christmas Day. Regardless of whether you are a religious person or not, regardless of whether you are a Christian, a non-Christian, an atheist, an agnostic, whatever your views on religion are, Christmas is still a profoundly important day for all of us who live in the West. And the reason it's a profoundly important day, because the 25th of December is the day which is set aside to commemorate and to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. Now, Jesus Christ isn't just a religious figure for those who live in the West. Jesus Christ teaches a whole lot of principles and doctrines that end up shaping the modern West as we know it today. We are still living under that legacy. So his birth sets in motion the events and all of the core principles, the core doctrines, the core ideas that actually give rise to the Western society that we are living in today, or those sort of fundamental things about living in the West and the freedoms that we enjoy, and these moral intuitions about human equality and the importance of every single human life that we'll just take for granted. So this isn't just a religious occasion. This is something for all of us in the West that we should all be celebrating. A great example of one of these core principles that we often take for granted, we read about in the New Testament. For those who don't know anything about the Christian Bible, the New Testament is the second part of the Christian Bible. It's a collection of what are called books, but often a lot of them are actually letters. And the second most important person after Jesus when it comes to teaching Christian doctrines and Christian principles in the New Testament is a guy called Paul. And basically Paul was someone who worked for the Jewish authorities. He wandered around the place persecuting the early Christian church. He considered them a threat. He wasn't Christian at all. He's quite opposed to Christianity. And then he has this profound experience on the road to a place called Damascus, and he has a big conversion experience. He renounces his former ways, and he actually becomes a Christian himself. And then from there, he goes on to learn about the Christian doctrines from those early church leaders, the people who walked with Christ, the people who were lived and were taught by Christ. And then Paul actually goes on to become one of the most influential teachers in the early Christian church. And after Jesus, he is the second most important person when it comes to actually teaching Christian doctrines in the New Testament. And one of the letters that Paul writes is a letter to a group of Christians in a place called Galatia. Now, Galatia is in modern-day Turkey. And in this letter, which is explaining all sorts of Christian doctrines and principles, these are the things that Christians believe. If you want to be a Christian, call yourself a Christian, this is what it is to be a Christian. Here's the principles that we believe. And one of the principles that's hugely important and is basically the beginning of a massive change in the world, a seismic shift in the world as we know it, is when he says to that church in Galatia that because of Jesus, there is now no more woman or man. There is now no more Jew or Gentile, so no Jew or non-Jew. There is now no more slave or free. Everybody is equal according to the teachings of Christ. It's very explicit the way he spells it out. And what he's saying is not that males and females, the differences don't matter, they're not real. He's not saying that, that the differences between Jews and non-Jews are not real. He's not saying that the differences between various people and their statuses in life don't mean anything. But what he's saying is these things don't define us. And you are not a better person just because you happen to have a different ethnicity. You are not a better person because of your biological sex. You are not a better person because of the status that you have in life. Everyone, regardless of those things, is equal according to Christian teaching. Now that idea is hugely seismic, as I said, in the way it changes the ancient world. Because even pagan Rome and pagan Greece at their height, and these were great societies that did really amazing things, they didn't believe this idea. Basically, they believed that some people were just born inferior to other people. That was the way of the ancient pagan world. And it's the teachings of Jesus, of Christianity, that completely transform that. And those teachings, and that idea in particular, is still with us today. It's so fundamental to so much of what we take for granted in the Western world today. This idea that regardless of who you are, you're a human being, you're equal, and you have this profound worth, and no one can claim to be superior. The other thing about the Christian doctrine and this whole idea of the birth of Jesus and why it's so important in shaping the West is that it's built on the back of something that within Christianity is called the incarnation. It's just a big way of basically saying that God comes to earth and doesn't just come to earth and walk amongst his creation, but God actually becomes one of us. He takes on a human body. And that's quite a profound thing, because it's not unusual to have the idea in the ancient world of the gods associating with human beings, but the way they associate with them is nothing like what you see in Christianity. And it's not just the fact that God comes down in the form of a humble little baby born in a stable in Bethlehem, takes on a human body and experiences all the human things that we go through, but it's this idea that he does that so that he can sacrifice himself and save us. Now, that's quite a profound thing, and it's built on the back of this profound humility, this idea that a God would lower himself to become one of us in order to save us. And there is a profound humility in that, and that is why for Christianity, humility is such an essential trait. It just underpins so much of Christianity, and it's something that really is still with us today in the West, and even in ways perhaps we don't even realise. You can't have a flourishing society with respect for other people if you've got everyone living in that society believing that they are the most important person in the world and that everyone else should bow down before them. You actually have to be humble enough to accept that other people have an equal value and worth, and that they matter as well as you. So humility is quite essential, and it's still very essential to a lot of the things, as I said, a lot of the moral intuitions and things that we take for granted today in the West. The other thing as well about the incarnation that's quite important is this idea that it gives the human experience an almost a divine status. It's this idea that being human actually matters. It matters so much, the human experience and what it is to be human, that God would choose to actually come down, become one of us, and actually save and redeem humanity. And that's quite a profound concept. It's not like us lowly plebs and the gods way up there. It's this idea that the very experience we are living, it does matter. There's something about it that is profoundly important, and which, and in and of itself, is a way in which we can find profound meaning in this life. So this life actually matters. It's not just a random, pointless thing. We're not just slaves to the gods. We are not just mere plebs at the bottom of some divine food chain. We actually matter, and our human experience matters as well. And what happens is that these ideas and the ideas that flow out of Christian doctrine basically shape the modern West in all sorts of ways which we take for granted today. Regardless of whether you are a Christian or a non-Christian, whether you're an atheist or an agnostic. There was one scholar, and I can't remember his name escapes me, but he had this great quote. He said that even in absolutely secular societies, when you're talking about secular Western societies, it's still Christian dreams that you dream. In other words, the things that we consider important and we consider essential to having a flourishing society, like our human rights, they are built on the back of this notion of human equality. Now, that's not something that you get from pagan Greece and pagan Rome, but it is something that comes about as a direct result of the teachings and the principles that are taught by Jesus Christ, and then that his followers obviously embraced. If you want to read more about this, I'd highly recommend Larry Seidentop's book, Inventing the Individual, The Origins of Western Liberalism. And Larry Seidentop is not a Christian. He's an ex-Oxford University professor, and he writes about how, and traces right back through from the pagan world through the last 2,000 years of human history to show why Christianity is absolutely essential, and the principles of Christianity are absolutely essential to what it is to live in a free, modern, Western, democratic society. So regardless of who you are and what your religious beliefs are, and as I said, I'm not asking you to change your religious beliefs, but I would encourage you, maybe on the 25th of December, raise an eggnog to Jesus and to some of those principles that actually give rise to the freedoms that we all take for granted. Maybe spend some time, if you don't know much about that story of the nativity, of the birth of Jesus, Mary and Joseph and all that kind of stuff. There's a great recent film called The Nativity Story, starring Kesha Castle-Hughes and a young Oscar Isaac, which tells the basic story of the nativity, the birth of Jesus. If you don't know much about it, it's well worth checking out. Now, obviously, a lot of people are going to watch that and say, well, I don't believe all the religious stuff, but there's some interesting things here that are worth knowing, because this story is actually pivotal to the society that I live in today in the West, and which as I said, often I take for granted a lot of the rights and freedoms and these basic ideas and principles which underpin this free, open, democratic society where we're all supposed to have equality and respect for each other. Maybe if you've got a church near you that does a midnight mass, get along and check out the midnight mass. Make sure you go somewhere where they still play an organ and they've maybe got a good choir or something like that, and you'll have probably a really beautiful experience. It's not something you experience really any other time. And you'll experience something beautiful and perhaps a high culture and a high art that you wouldn't necessarily experience in any other time in this life. It's a bit more than a lot of the superficial stuff. You might see a few beautiful stained glass windows, some important bits of history floating around in the church, and you might also be lucky enough to encounter a group of people who gather together for that midnight mass, who actually are living out a lifestyle that you look at and you say, you know what, even though I'm not religious myself, I really appreciate the fact that they put a premium on community and caring for other people and connecting with people beyond just your own family. Because I think we can all agree, regardless of our religious views, that in our society there is a real lack of compassion at times. There is a lot of divisions where there really shouldn't be, and Christmas is a time of reminder, I guess, that the essential element in all of this and healing these types of divisions is humility. It's not about what someone suggests trying to enforce and impose, social justice doctrines on people. Instead, it's about having the humility to accept that when I encounter and engage with another human person, they matter just as much as I do. And I have no right to force them to believe what I want them to believe. And in humility, I should stop and take the time to listen to what they're saying, because that's how flourishing human societies thrive, and you never know, I might just learn something important along the way. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below, and if you appreciate the video content I'm making and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on Patreon. There is a link in the video description below, and another link is about to appear on screen soon. In the meantime, please, no matter who you are, no matter what you are going to be doing on the 25th of December, have a very, very Merry Christmas and a joyous and Happy New Year. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media.